Welcome, everybody. Here we got the nested virtualization brown bag. We're talking a little about dev, test, and home labs. Where the focus today is on how nested virtualization is going to enable you to do that, as well as whatever questions come up. Very happy to have joining me here really the experts when it comes to this stuff. We got William Lamb here to my immediate left, and we got Doug Baer as well. Also expecting Nick Marshall at some juncture in time.
It's a seat for now.
A little bit about us. Twitter handles, blogs. I really have nothing on my blog relevant anymore these days, to be quite honest, but that's not to say with these guys. Doug does a lot of blogging of our hands-on labs on the VMware site, and William, who you're probably all familiar with, a lot of blogging around automation, and what interests me most, nested virtualization. When it comes to nested virtualization, you kind of have some options, or when it comes to your labs, you have options, right? You could leverage hands-on labs, which Doug's a big part of. You can use your existing workstation. You don't have to go build a whole big lab, right? You got your workstation, Fusion. We've got some questions. We've got some cards. Auto Lab, which Nick will try to speak with, or I will fill in for him later on. And then also, maybe you want to build your own box, run everything on the same box, nested hypervisors. Maybe you want to scale out. Still leverage nested virtualization. So you have options, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that piece a little later on here. But really just want to get right into it with these guys and start off with Doug here and talk a little bit about our nested virtualization and how it's taking part in our hands-on labs.
All right, great. So how many of you guys have taken labs at VMworld? All right. So we do use nested virtualization. We run virtual ESXi hosts. We have a construct we call a VPod, which is basically a couple of nested ESX hosts. This is an example of our base pod. So we have a Windows box that runs Active Directory, it runs DNS. We have all kinds of basically the infrastructure components in there. And we use a virtual storage appliance. So in the past we used OpenFiler. This year we started using FreeNAS. And then we've got like a VPod router, which is running just a Debian Linux box. So we actually virtualize by running multiple layer 3 networks over the same layer 2 wire. This is all built inside a vCloud Director vApp. So you can do the same sort of thing without vCloud Director, but that's how we do our orchestration to be able to provision a bunch of labs for the show. Let's see the main interface here. So if you take this concept, you can extend it using the control center as like your jump box. In a home lab is something that is something you can do and helps keep things manageable, right? So simple construct, simple entry point, and definitely manageable. If you switch here. So one of the things we do when we're building the hands-on labs is we try to keep our resources as small as possible. So we want to deploy the products which aren't necessarily deployed for production use. We just want to show you how the product works. We don't necessarily need to have the full, hey, I need to be able to support 100 ESX hosts and 1,000 VMs or anything like that. Most of the time in our pods, we've got 3 to 5 ESX hosts, and we may have, I think our biggest pod has 27 nested VMs running on top. So we don't need a large vCenter as far as how many resources that box needs. And if you just download the vCenter appliance, for example, it's sized for a much larger environment. If you're looking at a home lab or one of our pods, you can basically reduce the resources down. This is what we used in 2013, and it's actually held pretty true for 2014 as well in the labs. We basically run a Windows box as our control center. We'll run 1 virtual CPU and 5 gigs of RAM, unless you have to add more services to that box. So in general, like I said, we're running Active Directory, we're running certificate services, we run DNS, and then that's the user experience box. The storage, actually, we found that if we run 2012, we need slightly less storage, so we run about 20 gigs. If we need additional space, we attach an extra drive to it. From a build process perspective, we add the extra drive and then we drop it. But that's mostly because when we do deployments, we don't want to have these massive storage allocations on the back end. From a virtual ESXi perspective, we start out with 2 virtual CPUs and 5 gigs of RAM. And then from a storage, we just use a 2 gig boot drive. So these are kind of the minimums that we found that'll work in most instances. And I think these numbers are kind of, if you're building a home lab and you just want to run something nested, start with these numbers and then see what you need. So just some kind of best practices we wanted to share with you guys. This is kind of what we do in our environment. As I said, we've got that control center jump box. This is where the services live. These are some of the tools that we've found useful. I like Notepad++ because it's free, and we run a lot of PowerShell scripts on that box. And so it's got context-sensitive highlighting and that sort of thing. WinSCP is good, and then if you have Linux boxes, I like setting up key-based authentication so you don't have to type the passwords all the time. So one of our goals in hands-on labs is to reduce the amount of manual input, stuff that's just kind of boring, and so we want to you get to the meat of the lab. In a home lab, I found that that's very useful as well. You don't want to keep typing those passwords, but any passwords that you do set, you want to document, right? You want to don't forget that password, because sometimes you build your home lab, and then 3 months go by and you're real busy and you come back and say, oh gosh, I forget what that password was. So one thing we do in the hands-on labs that's equally applicable is, hey, let's standardize on the passwords. So come up with a password that's easy to remember, easy to type, and then just use that as much as you can. So one thing about the hands-on labs is we deploy massive numbers of labs at scale. We're not showcasing performance. So we have a vSAN lab, for example. We're not trying to show you guys how the thing performs because we don't actually run with SSDs, right? We're running nested, and we fake ESXi out, using some of the tricks that William mentions in his blog. So we'll do that. It doesn't necessarily perform like it would on physical hardware. So if your goal from a home lab perspective is to kind of see how things actually would perform, you may be better off not running nested and running on physical hardware. But if you just want to see, for example, you're studying for an exam or something, go ahead and fake it out and run through the configuration process. That's definitely something you can do nested. Let's see, from the VM configuration options, so when we do our deployments, we set 2 specific parameters in the VMX files. The UUID action equals keep. That's basically just when we deploy, you don't get the question that says, hey, has this VM been moved or copied? And then you have to answer that question. It's just kind of more of an annoyance, and that helps prevent that. The keyboard typematic min delay, that's for Linux boxes, so you don't go in to type a password and you get a key that looks like it's stuck and it just goes across the screen. So basically it reduces the keyboard buffer so that it doesn't sit there and just keep typing characters. So from a lab's perspective, that's kind of some of our guidance. And if you take a look at just one more quick thing about HOL Logical Networking, I mentioned that we run a single layer 2 network with multiple layer 3 networks piled on top of it. This is kind of how we do that. The VPod router manages that. And during development, we've actually got a connection to the internet for our lab teams to be able to pull bits down and do the configuration. But when we deploy in the labs, we actually kill that connection, so the pod runs completely isolated from the network. And the access to the console is actually through the console proxy and vCloud director. So if we look at networking, how do you configure networking for one of these nested pods to run on top of a physical ESX host? The first thing people do when they build an ESX box is they'll say, okay, I run everything, it looks great. Now I'm going to try to start up a virtual machine on top of that, and sometimes the networking doesn't work. Right? Depending on where the virtual machine lives and where the target lives, you may not be able to communicate over the network. So there are a couple settings you need to set on the physical host to enable networking to work when you're running nested. And those 2 settings, William actually has a really good blog article on this. But you want to set promiscuous mode on your physical host virtual switch, and you want to set forge transmits to enable sending of packets out. Okay, so those are 2 settings that you definitely need to look at. As I mentioned, William's got a great blog article on that. So let's, is Nick?
No, I'm going to cover that.
You're going to cover that? All right.
Yeah, we'll come. If anybody has any networking specific, we'll come back to that. I want to make sure we get all the content in.
Right.
So a couple things I want to mention. We talked about options. You have a lot of options, whether it's you want to just leverage hands-on labs. Maybe you don't need the whole, maybe you don't need to even leverage nested yourself and manage it. We do that for you. Autolab's an option along with Fusion and Workstation, or you want to build your own hub. So Autolab, I see a lot of faces out here who are sponsored for Autolab. You can turn the camera on Alistair, that'd be pretty cool, right? But a lot of people have contributed to this in the community, including our no-show Nick, right? I know he's done a lot, so he'll be here at some point later on today. But you can download the lab guides here. This is kind of your resources for it, and I think seeing a lot of people in the audience can probably recommend and add some real-life use case to it. Again, with the lab guides, Nick also, I think, had put out a blog post not that long ago that you can actually run a Synology or other VSAs as VMs, right? Leverage those for your storage. A lot you can do with the labs, a lot that's out there today amongst our blogs or others, and love some questions about that when we get towards the end. What I want to do is flip this back over to William so he can talk a little bit about some pretty cool things, some things I've been leveraging internally for a little bit, and that very excited to see out in the wild.
So sort of before I get started, how many of you guys are using nested ESXi today in your home lab, production, dev test? Right, good amount of you guys. So I won't go over sort of what nested ESXi was, but I do want to kind of go over some best practices, just a couple of them I've kind of noticed and challenges that I see potentially in the labs, even for development and production environments. And then if you guys have any questions, we can definitely get to it. One of the first best practices that I've seen some customers ask about is, should I enable the hardware virtualization by default on the virtual machine? And this really is required, so if you want to run 64-bit nested virtual machines on top of your nested ESXi VM. And it might sound easy to just default that for every single VM, but there is some associated overhead, and so a lot of customers say, hey, what if I just default this, create a VM template, and just create all of my VMs off of that? We definitely don't recommend that. There's some overhead, and so best practice for just any kind of general configurations, really make sure that it's applicable to the VM that you're applying it for. And so this is something that I've seen some customers do and basically kind of default it, and it just increases some overhead that can be used for other virtual machines. The other one that I want to actually dig into, and it's something I actually recently learned about in terms of its impact, is that as Doug talked about promiscuous mode and forged transmit, these are required on the physical virtual switch for proper networking. So here I kind of want to highlight what you would think, and I kind of want to get your guys' participation. So today, I have a physical ESXi host, whether it's a standard virtual switch or VDS, and I have a port group dedicated for my nested ESXi VM because I want to have that isolated, and I have a regular VM port group. So I have a virtual machine that's running in the green box, and a couple of nested ESXi VMs. And let's say I send 1,000 packets. Where do you guys think the packets will land? So if I send 1,000 packets and I want to go to that VM on the far right side, do you guys expect the packets to land over there? It's going to go all of them? Okay. So that's actually correct. So what you would expect is that the packets would land on that far virtual machine, but because promiscuous mode is enabled on the virtual switch, these nested ESXis is now able to basically listen to the virtual switch and receive all the packets. This was actually something that a blogger shared with me and saying he was trying to do some performance testing and wanted to upload some ISOs and realized that the performance overall of the systems started to drop. And so he did a little bit of troubleshooting and said, the only difference for this environment and some other ones he was running in production was I had a couple of nested ESXi VMs. So what if I just turned this off and started to narrow down the case? And he found out that by turning off the VMs, performance was up to par for his 10 gigabit connections. Once I power on the virtual machines, performance slowly decreased, and the more nested ESXi VMs I had, overall throughput of the system actually decreased. And I said, that's kind of interesting. I wonder why that is. And so I actually did this test because this is actually a snapshot of my home lab, and I run 20, 30, 40 nested ESXi VMs, and I'm actually uploading an ISO for a Kickstart server. So I upload a gig, and I'm running ESX top with a 2-second delay. And if you take a look at the red, all my nested ESXi VMs are getting the same exact packets. So that really hit home when I looked at that. I said, wow, I've actually been running really inefficient. We've been doing a lot of work with nested ESXi to really make it performance. It's still not officially supported from a VMware point of view, but you can see all the different use cases. We're doing it for hands-on labs. Lots of customers actually using this in production for their dev and QA environments, right? It's a quick way of spinning things up. But this is actually something that I didn't really realize, and I talked to some of our PMs and got in touch with engineering. Christian Dickman, who's actually one of the lead engineers for vSAN, said, I've actually seen this problem before. And it has to do with the promiscuous mode being enabled. And the issue is that our virtual switches doesn't have MAC learning. We know where the VMs are basically located at. So implementing MAC learning in our vSwitch didn't really make sense. But it's a problem when you have to enable promiscuous mode at the nested level, where it's actually listening all traffic. So there's no good way of kind of fixing this problem. And I started talking to him. I said, wouldn't it be cool if there was a way to kind of filter that out? And Christian's like, hey, actually, this is actually something we've ran into before, and we've actually solved it. And so what I actually want to talk about today is a brand new fling that will be out today. This is actually VMware's 4th fling in 1 week, right? So definitely a lot of shout outs to our flings team, and definitely check out their booth. There's a new contest this year, but what I want to talk about is this new ESXi Mac Learning VIB that you'll be installing on the physical ESXi host. So the first step is to take this VIB and install on your ESXi host, similar to the VMware tools for nested ESXi. Second portion, to activate this DV filter for each nested ESXi VM, you'll add 2 parameters, advanced settings. So I have a screenshot using the web clients. This Ethernet pound number, so this will represent the number of Ethernet NICs. So if you have 4 different Ethernet devices, you'll enumerate them starting with 0 up to 4. Using the DV filter equals maclearn. And then the other parameter is this Ethernet filter for name equals fail open. And by doing this, it will automatically filter out and never send those packets down to the nested ESXi levels. And being able to do those shadow copies of the packets is a very expensive operation on the host side. So we're actually burning a lot of CPU and networking throughput. So by doing this, we completely eradicate these additional packets going to the VMs and stuff. And so now you can truly run nested ESXi as performant as we've been building it. And over the years, we've been doing a lot of enhancements and really making it performance. And this is sort of the one last area that we haven't fixed yet. And talking to Christian about it, he's like, we solved it. And similar to the VMware tools for nested ESXi, this is sort of a mandatory, in my opinion at least, everybody needs to kind of have this. And this is a fling that we are going to be releasing tomorrow, and I also have a more detailed blog article on the details of this. And so this is something I've been really excited about, working with the engineer and try to get that released as soon as possible.
Just to add some,
Yep. Yeah, so I don't know if you wanted to jump into and we'll take questions at the end as well, too.
I can talk about resources. Sorry, I'm a bit late, guys. So, have you all learned something? Yes, good. All right. These places here, make sure that you get on the community forums. People talk about nested stuff all the time on there, even though it's not officially supported. So get on the VMTM forums. Obviously, William Spog has a whole heap of stuff on there around nested. He's been doing this stuff for longer than anyone I know. Specifically around the Mac stuff, I know that that's a passionate area of yours at the moment. And of course, I think Autolab was touched on a little bit as well. So if you want to talk more about Autolab, I'll be around here for the next couple of hours. Alistair out the back has stuff on how you can run this stuff just within Fusion or Workstation. I think we've got a few copies to give away.
Yeah, we do.
All right.
So this time is your guys' time. Make sure you guys ask the questions. Anything we help out, we want to basically give away Fusion cards.
Who wants a copy of Workstation Fusion? Got a good question to ask? Oh.
This is easy.
This is easy. You just need to ask a question. So you're a Windows guy.
You can ask Typer V, too.
Oh, we'll give them away to other people then.
Yeah. Yep. Oops. Did you want to learn? What was the question?
Oh. That's a typo.
There's a typo. Is it a typo? Yeah, sorry about that. Yep, yeah, no, it's definitely maclearn. Yeah, I have some typo on this. All the details are on the blog article, and this will be posted tomorrow. I think 9 a.m. is when we're going to be releasing the fling. So, again, yeah.
Yeah, question.
It's an internal name in terms of how it's been built by the engineer. It's just an internal key name to basically key off the string. So sort of the DV, I don't have all the screen. No. As long as those are just key value pairs, so as long as it's implemented. And the DV filter maclearn is basically the DV filter name. So once we key off of that, and then the engineer decides, say, fail open is how you implement it. Yeah.
With the latest update you've done here with the Fling, is there a point where the host is still going to override even though you've muted them off?
What do you mean by that?
Like it's still going to start consuming more resources?
No. This actually reduces that altogether, because now the host no longer. In terms of,
Is there a point where it's still, like this is to increase the performance, right?
it's not to increase performance, it's to ensure that we don't do anything redundant that we're not supposed to, because all these packets get sent to all the hosts, and the host says, oh, it's not mine, drop it. Sure. Right? And so by doing this, and remember, this is only specifically for nested ESXi VMs only, because we require promiscuous mode to be enabled.
The think about this is, you're turning your vSwitch into a switch instead of a hub.
Yeah, yeah.
Real life use case. If you take a VM, nested VM under there, use WDS to deploy to Windows. Before I found out about this, talking about 45 minutes up to. Once I implemented this, under 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I mean, huge.
So when you're uploading ISOs, you're like, man, nested ESXi VMs can be slow, right? This has a lot of impact, and you get back all those precious resources, especially for home labs, back to the virtual machines that you really want to be running. And so this is really sort of the last component to really making this as performant as possible on vSphere.
We're going to make sure that this is in the next version of AutoLab, by the way.
Yep.
I actually have a question. The reason you guys use your own VPod router instead of the edge firewall?
So we actually do use the edge firewalls, but it's on the edge of the pod. What we're using inside the pod is our own router because it lets the lab teams configure networks and DHCP and that sort of thing per lab. Yeah, exactly. But it gives them the flexibility to configure that without requiring them to have access outside the pod. So we try to give, it's like a baby data center, you know, and they have full control within that data center.
I see.
Just a quick question on the throwing the dog. I teach for a community college. We deploy our labs very similar to how you do. We've created a VM. Inside that VM, we have a domain controller and a couple of VSs on it. So one of the problems I have, and I'm just lazy and haven't looked at it, is probably block this. When I clone those VMs, so we just do it manually. We're not using VPod director. The VHV setting is lost during the clone. Am I doing something wrong, or do you have a quick answer to that?
How are you doing the clone?
Basically, just right-clicking the VM and saying, clone. We spin up 12 labs.
Are you doing it through the C# client or the web client?
That's a very good question.
That's it.
Most of the time we're doing it through the C# client, and
See, another reason you should be using the web client. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I mean, it's the same thing with even some of the CLIs type of things. It's the APIs aren't implemented. So this VHV parameter came in with 5.5, I believe. And so the functionality is not exposed in C# client, so it doesn't know about this property. So when you clone it, it's like, oh, I don't know about this, and so it doesn't copy it over. If you do it from the web client, then this property gets copied over.
I realized that as I was asking the question.
Yeah.
All right, we got time for how many more questions? Couple? One more here, and then we'll wrap it up.
We get that question all the time. I would love to support it, actually. But one of the challenges at VMware trying to support Mac Mini, if you look at it across the solutions, right, we've really been building it towards the enterprise, and so you really want to expect enterprise-grade hardware. And one of the things that the Mac Minis lack today is ECC memory support. You know, I've been doing a series of articles of various companies, including VMware, using Mac Minis in production, and you can build your application in such a way that it's highly available, where the hardware truly becomes commodity-based. You don't care if one dies, right? But from an official standpoint on the HCL, it's not supported because it doesn't have ECC memory. It's something that we acknowledge, and it's something that Apple kind of needs to support, and I don't see them getting into sort of ECC memory for sort of a consumer-grade piece of hardware. So from that point of view, I don't know if it's ever going to get supported. But if you guys do have feedback, definitely talk to our product managers at VMware, as well as letting Apple know and getting that feedback. The SD card slot? Yeah, I tried it a couple while back ago. It kind of works, but doesn't really persist configurations when you reboot. Traditionally, I've been using USB. I don't know if same for you guys. I mean,
we use USB.
It's just so easy, and there's a couple of slots, so it's not like you're burning something away. So it's yeah.
All right, I got 3 versions of Fusion to give away. Who needs a copy? Has a Mac?
Just throw them out there.
All right. The condition is you have to download AutoLab and get it up and running. And I think, is there other stuff to give away?
I have a couple of Hands-on Labs USB chargers. I'll give you one because you had a good question. Thank you. And this guy, I'll give you that one. Thank you. And I'll get you one.
All right, guys, we'll wrap up here. If you need to get in touch with us, we're all available here or online.
Cool. Thanks for your guys' time.
Thank you.